Hi, everyone. This is Nina Collins. I'm here at Revel. This is a recording of our podcast, Raging Gracefully, which we do every Wednesday. This is our first one of the new, fall season after Labor Day. I'm very excited. I have here today with us Yana Tallon-Hicks. Yana is the author of a new book called Hot and Unbothered: How to Think About, Talk About, and Have the Sex You Really Want. And it's coming out. It just came out.
It's out.
It's just out, so you can order it. And I think it has a really, for me, as someone who's read a lot of sex books, I felt like it really did have an unusual, great perspective. We'll get into it, but really, really liked it. I'll quickly read her bio. Yana Tallon-Hicks, LMFT, is a couples and relationships therapist and a consent, sex, and sexuality writer and educator living in Western Massachusetts. Her work centers around the belief that pleasure-positive and consent-based sex education can positively impact our lives and the world. So welcome. And to the people in the audience, feel free to enter questions in the chat, and I will definitely get to them. I have a bunch of questions myself, but I'll definitely get to them. I'm wearing the goofiest glasses. Hold on one second. Okay, they're distracting me. I feel like I often don't see my look until I get on Zoom, and then
I do that too. And then I'm like, oh, my hair.
Yeah. All right. So before we get into really what your book is about, I'd love to know kind of how you got into this work. And also, I did read your book, but I'm going to ask questions that are answered in the book for the audience. But
oh yeah, that makes sense.
How did you get into this?
There's like a short version and a long version. I guess the short version is that I was a teenager in the early 2000s, and sex ed was pretty sad. And it was pre-Google. So it was also pre-social media. So we didn't have a lot of alternative options to sex education. And even though that has changed a lot, I still think that there are a lot of gaps that we're not really, we don't have a lot of information on how to navigate them.
And did you just decide straight out of college, this is what I want to do? Or was there kind of a path?
I had kind of just in my personal life as a teenager had gotten really fired up about just the state of dating and kind of sex and sexuality for me and my peers. And so I took a lot of visits to our local sort of Planned Parenthood type of thing called Tapestry Health, and was really into lecturing my friends about safer sex and advocating for what they wanted and trying to do that myself. And so a friend of mine, before I started college, before I started undergrad, she was like, you should really talk to people about sex for a living. And I was like,
cool.
Well, that's not a job. And she was like, yes, it is. And then I ended up doing that in my undergrad and kind of just snowballed.
That's amazing. That's great. Yeah. Good for you. And this is your first book.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. But I've been writing a sex advice column for 12 or 13 years. And I've been teaching sex education workshops for 10. So the book was kind of a natural.
You had all this material kind of overflowing, basically. Did you decide to write the book yourself and pursue an agent, or did someone pursue you?
An agent approached me. And it was the same week that I found out that I was surprise pregnant with my kid.
Oh,
that was a big week. I was like, okay. So I
cool to be approached by an agent. I used to be a literary agent, so I used to be the one for people like you. Where was your sex column?
It's in the Valley Advocate, which is our local kind of alternative newspaper here in the Valley. And my agent found me through something I had written freelance for The Toast.
Nice, great. And how old's your kid? And boy, girl?
He is.
People ask that anymore? Are you even allowed to ask that anymore? Is it a boy or a girl?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people ask, and we use he, him pronouns for him. We also accept they, them pronouns for him. Our policy is he has so many books about gender and sexuality and self-expression that are geared towards 3-year-olds that we're just going to take his lead when he's able to tell us things.
Right. I guess the question now, that hadn't even occurred to me till just this second, but I guess when you ask that these days, you should probably say, what is their name? I don't really know.
Yeah, I usually say something neutral. I'll be like, oh, what's your kid's name?
Yeah. What's your kid? Well, in the way you said our kid. Okay. So what is... I'm so old. Okay. What is their name?
His name is Rocco.
Okay. Rocco. Very, very cute. All right. Well, so one of the things that I found really interesting about this, oh, and I should say you have a practice, right? You not
Yes,
write about sex, but you are a sex counselor. So you have a
yes,
private practice with people.
I
Because the
do.
thing about this book that I found kind of unusual, like I've read a lot of great sex books. I've been doing this. I used to be an agent, but I've been doing this work running a community for like 7 years. And in our community, we kind of pride ourselves in being really open about women's sexuality and menopause and what's going on and the changes that happen with sex, and a lot of ways to kind of demystify shame around aging and, things like vaginal dryness and ED, but also to celebrate that a lot of women are having the best sex of their lives. Like there's a real range, right, for older women. So, I've read books like Getting It On, which I really like. So I expected, as I came into this book, I expected it to be, I don't know, a more general kind of sex book, but I found it's very much written from the perspective of a sex therapist. It actually made me feel like everyone should have sex therapy. Like so I was like, oh, as you were talking about things like, negative narratives, I was like, oh shit, I might have some negative narratives. So
I do.
you do? Do we all?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we all do. So my first question was that, like, do you think everyone needs sex therapy?
I mean, I think everybody could, well, everybody is a strong term, but I think a lot of people could benefit from just having a space to talk about sex and sexuality with somebody who is non-judgmental and informed about these things.
Yeah.
And I feel like most of the time that is what is most impactful for people that work with me, is just that they have this place where they know they can come in and immediately start talking about something that might feel like private or salacious in some other context, that they can come in and just talk.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we on Revel, I started something called Monday Night Sex Chat, and it's an open Zoom room where women just come and we do that. We just talk about sex. And the reason we did it is a member sent me an article saying the more you talk about sex, the better sex you have. And I was like, all right, so let's just start talking about sex. But you obviously are, really educated, and really we are a group of non-professionals doing it and supporting each other. And I do think it's really helpful. But you talked about a lot of things like the use of CBT to unwind negative narratives. So can you talk a little bit about this whole idea of pleasure pessimism, negative narratives, and CBT? I know that's a big ask, but I think I had never seen that written about in that way, like in Come As You Are, which is a great book, right, about women's orgasm, which you refer to a bunch. Like there's some of this stuff, but anyway, I was impressed with your book. So
thanks. The pleasure pessimism, negative narratives, and the cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT, is those chapters were definitely some of the hardest for me to write, just because it was hard to distill like these big therapy concepts in like a way that felt interesting and easy.
Like I was like, my daughter's 28 and has just become a therapist, and I'm going to suggest you read this. Like it was a really helpful explanation of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, good.
As it applies to sex.
Yeah. So the idea so negative narratives are kind of like these narratives that we tell ourselves, either consciously or subconsciously, about sex and our ability to have the sex that we want and be present in the kind of sex, or be present in the way we want to be during sex. So like an example that I give in the book, I believe, is kind of like, I take too long to have an orgasm.
Right, which is very common for women.
So common.
Particularly in middle age and post-menopause. Like that is definitely one of my negative narrative, is not so much that I take too long to have an orgasm, just that I can't always have an orgasm anymore. Like it's just not worth it. Like it's just whatever. Yeah.
Right. And part of that negative narrative is influenced by this idea that an orgasm has to be present for sex to be enjoyable or successful, that women in particular need to have orgasms in a certain way or in a certain time frame. It's informed by a lot of miseducation about how orgasm works in general, right? So like in the classic porn narrative, we're told that like penis and vagina penetration happens for 5 minutes, you're having simultaneous orgasms right away. It actually takes people an average of 14 minutes to have an orgasm, and consistent clitoral stimulation, which is external and usually for people doesn't happen via penetration. Right. So if we're told that we have this one route to get to a successful sexual experience, and our bodies or brains or whatever, our partnership just isn't functioning within that box, we start feeling like we're failing. And then we kind of get all rolled up into this. So the pleasure pessimism is sort of like looking at all of that stuff as like a collection of things that we hold that is like, I'm not good enough to do this. I can't do this. I can't have the sex that I want to have.
Or he's bad, or my partner doesn't understand me, or yeah.
Actually, or my partner's failing, like my partnership is a failure if we don't have super easy, spontaneous, perfectly aligned sex, which most people, especially long-term partners, do not have.
Right. Well, that was another thing you talk about. You talk about the mismatch of desire or tastes, or and I thought an interesting point you make about that is that it's not just from the get-go. That can happen later in relationships, like things shift, right? So you know, someone might be kinkier than the other person, and how do you deal with that? So the negative narrative and the pleasure pessimism are kind of related, right? So pleasure pessimism is when you think negative thoughts that kind of you create a story in your head about why it's not the way you want it to be, or why it's why you can't do what you want. And then how do you use CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, to unwind that a little bit?
Yeah, so cognitive behavioral therapy looks at kind of the cycle of how we think about things, leading to how we feel about things, leading to how we act in relation to those things, and looks at it as rooted in a negative narrative. So like someone might be like a non-sexual negative narrative might be like, I don't deserve to have a satisfying job. Right? Maybe that's like my core belief about myself. Therefore, I don't go after jobs. My actions, I don't go after jobs that I think are really cool. My feelings is that I feel like stuck or bad about myself. And my behaviors are that like I act in accordance with feeling stuck or bad. I kind of like do bare minimum performance or something like that. So in our sex lives, we also have that. So when we work with clients around sort of like how to unwind some of those sexual negative narratives, we're looking at like, how does your sex life, like, let's say the belief is it takes me too long to have an orgasm. So I'm taking too long. How does that make you feel? What kind of actions does that lead you to take in your sex life? The actions might be like, I just kind of like close up. Like, I'm really enjoying this oral sex, but I'm going to shut it down after 5 minutes because I'm taking too long. I don't want to bore my partner.
Right.
Blah,
or
blah.
I fake it. Right. So
or I fake it.
Or they end it quickly. Right. I mean, all that stuff is, I hear women talk about that all the time. Or they just feel, which sometimes I feel like I'm not going to come. It doesn't matter. Like it just like kind of, all right. And so what's the repair here?
So CBT looks at that cycle, and then you try to identify where's the easiest place to break this. So it's generally not the easiest to change your belief, because our beliefs have been kind of this slow drip over time. We've kind of gathered proof for ourselves that this is true. It's a little harder to get into. So instead, we look at the behaviors or the thoughts. So the behaviors might be like, generally, I would shut down oral sex within 3 minutes if I don't feel like I'm going to have an orgasm. Maybe my new behavior is I don't do that. I talk more openly to my partner about what I want. I like offer a correction about how I like to be touched. That might be a new behavior, which would then lead to a different experience, which might lead to a different belief.
Right. Over time, if you have different outcomes, your belief can shift.
Right. Or the thought can change. And so that's I'm a pretty cognitive therapist. So like a lot of that is kind of wrapped up in like sex education as information. So like the thought might change if I say, actually, the average person takes 14 minutes to have an orgasm. 14 minutes is a long time.
Yeah.
Like set a timer for 14 minutes and go about your day and do something and see how much stuff you get done in 14 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing for everyone to be reminded of.
Yeah.
14 minutes, right?
14 minutes is a long time, and classic porn is for entertainment. And so there's going to be certain things like 14 minutes of consistent clitoral stimulation might not be good entertainment or exciting entertainment. So like if we're thinking about how does orgasm happen, maybe we're going to have a different way of acting in our sex lives.
Yeah. So people can come in and talk to you. I mean, you learn all this in the book and it really is helpful, but I love that you kind of say like, number one, it's important to just have a place to be able to talk about sex and feel like it's not taboo and it's completely normal. And I'm telling you guys, when I read this book, I was like, wow, I've seen lots of therapists. I've never seen a sex therapist. And your book really made me think like more people should see sex therapists. And then identifying the negative narrative and thinking about how you can change that. I think that's really helpful. All right. So another question is, do you think bad chemistry is a thing? Do some people just have bad chemistry?
Like two partners have bad chemistry with each other?
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there is like a je ne sais quoi type of like quality to like a really like spark connection with somebody. But I don't know what you mean, like you're going on a date with someone and you're just like the chemistry's bad, or is it like
I mean, like, is it just possible that two people just have bad sex?
I don't know. I have never really had a couple come in and be like, our chemistry is just bad. We just have bad sex. Usually they have like a more specific complaint.
Okay.
Right. It's kind of like, it's more sort of like, I feel like she doesn't initiate as much as I do, and I'm starting to feel rejected, or like the sex we're having just isn't satisfying. And then we get to talk about like, okay, well, what kind of sex are you having? What kind of sex do you want to have? Because people often mistake sort of like there's kind of these like buzzwords around sexuality, like sex drive or chemistry, where it's like, what does that even really mean? Like people, your drive can, and Emily Nagoski talks about this a lot in her book, Come As You Are, is like a drive is sort of like a false idea because it can actually be influenced by a bunch of different things. So it's like, for me, a lot with my clients, I'm like, okay, you have low desire for sex. But what does that mean? Do you have low desire for sex with your partner or across the board? When you masturbate, is your desire low? Are you having orgasms by yourself? Or only not having orgasms with your person or other people? Are you having the kind of sex that you actually desire to have? Because people will get confused where they're like, oh, I have a low libido. It's like, well, do you have a low libido for sex, or are you just not having the kind of sex you actually want to have?
Right. The kind of sex you actually want to have. I mean, by that, you mean, anal sex, oral sex, or do you mean more like, am I not being, I guess it's all those things. I'm not being touched the way I want to be touched, or somehow it's just not working for me.
Right, exactly. And I think like, that's the thing, is like, it is so helpful to get specific. Like if we're thinking about, okay, what kind of sex do you want to have? Why would I desire to have sex that doesn't feel good to me, or is boring, or like, on the worst end of things, triggering me or something? Why would I desire to do that? So like, if we can get specific about like acts or how you like to feel or what you like to talk or think about, I think a lot of classic therapists that aren't necessarily sex therapists don't know how to bridge that topic. People feel uncomfortable, clients feel uncomfortable bridging it. A lot of therapists kind of classically have been trained to let your clients bring up sex first. But in the power dynamic, it's like really hard for people to broach that.
It's very hard for people to broach it. Yeah. And I'm wondering, do you often see people alone, or is it almost always in couples? Because it's also hard to broach it with your partner, right? I mean, everyone says really the issue with good sex is communication, and that's true. Good communication makes a huge difference, but it's hard for people to communicate about sex with their partner often.
Yeah, I see people both individually and in partners. So if I'm doing like a couples therapy session, the first session we'll meet together, and then the second session we meet individually for like, I split their session in half and we do a little one-on-one time.
Nice.
And that's because I think that, I mean, first it's a safety check, right? If there's something going on that I'm not aware of, I'd like to know. But I also think a lot of it is just getting that person on their own outside of their couple dynamic to see, okay, what is actually the issue? Like sometimes there's things that like they really don't want to say. And then we'll work around sort of like, okay, that's good for me to know. I'm not going to say this to your partner, but I am going to direct the work towards helping you figure out how to say it.
Okay, that is so cool. It must be so fun. Do you like the show? Do you like Orna Guralnick's Couples Therapy, the show on Showtime? Have you seen it?
I saw one episode and I just like, it's too work related for me. Like I'm kind of just like, okay, like I wouldn't have done it that way, or no therapist would actually do this or that or the other, you know, like you kind of get
Totally.
to.
It's funny. My daughter said the same thing, and I'm actually friends with Orna from here where I live in Brooklyn. She was a parent at my kid's school, and she's fabulous, and I'm happy for her. I only watched the first season, but it's just, anyway, just talking to you, it just seems really, it's great. It's very important work. It's really cool. So what was the hardest thing? You said it was difficult writing this book, because it was hard to really describe the nuts and bolts of the work. Oh, sorry. Kathleen in the audience just asked the series we were referencing. Kathleen, it's called Couples Therapy on Showtime. And it's a very good, I don't know if you'd call it like a docu-series about a couples therapist, not a sex therapist, but a couples therapist. And she sees people, and it's recorded kind of like a little bit like Esther Perel's podcast. That's another way you can like listen in on couples therapy.
I've heard very good things. I'm just partial to like fashion design shows.
Fashion design shows, you said?
Yeah.
Like blind.
There's a really good one called The Hype that I really love. I forget what service it's on now.
Like real people designing stuff?
Yeah. Then there's I've been watching Making the Cut.
I've never watched Making the Cut. I've heard about it. I really need TV. But wait, tell us about so are you really into I guess you are really into fashion.
Well, it's interesting because like being really into fashion, like if I could afford to buy any fashion, anything that I wanted, I feel like I would be dressed to the nines all the time. But working within my real life, being really into fashion, I feel like it's a theoretical, you know?
Still, that's fun.
But I always said that if I had a second go at life, I would go to fashion design school.
Oh, that's interesting. If I had a second go at life, I would be an art consultant.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I was a book scout in the 90s where I was like reporting on the book market. Like I'm sure I probably know who your agent is. In the 90s, I knew every agent and publisher in town, and then I became an agent. But I feel like an art scout would have been a really fun thing to do. Who's your favorite designer?
Oh, see, I'm not that deep into it. I mostly really like the reality shows because I like to see what people are creating.
That's
on their
cool.
Own,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I should try that.
Like, I don't know, like, I wouldn't be able to be like, oh, that's Prada. I can tell. Like, I'm not more like, it's more like, oh, that's like a really cute, I love this. Like, I like it when I like high fashion in the sense that it's like very weird, but still looks good. I'm like,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it is really weird. That's very funny. So were there any surprises in writing this book, or was this whole thing just easy for you?
The proposal part was the hardest for sure. It was like pulling teeth for me. It was really hard because I was like pregnant and having the baby. It took me about like 2 years to do the proposal.
Oh,
I had
wow.
never written like in a way, like when you write a proposal, you know, you're writing like 3 different sample chapters. So like just pulling stuff out of no context was really challenging. And I was just like, like, I don't know. And it was all like so new to me, and the proposal process is so long. Like for people that don't know, it's like my proposal was 75 pages long. You're basically like
proposal. I always used to say as an agent, it's really, if you write a really good proposal, it's like a roadmap to the book. So once you finished it, you totally know how to write the book, but it is torture.
Yeah. So once the proposal was done and the book deal was in and I was writing, that part was so easy for me. And partially it's just because I've been writing about sex for so long that all of this stuff was sort of already in my brain, and I didn't really get stuck a lot. Like I got a little stuck in just trying to like simplify ideas that were kind of these bigger therapy concepts.
I like the way you do. I mean, first of all, the illustrations in the book are super cool, I thought. And then also I liked these, like, where are they? These like bubbles you do, these like charts.
Oh yeah, lots of charts. My illustrator is named Rebecca Soto. Her Instagram is Art by Rebecca. She does really good stuff.
Oh, I'm going to look her up. Wait, I have to write that down. Art by Rebecca. Okay. Yeah, the illustrator was great.
Rebecca with 1 C.
Okay. Oh yeah, I see there's something about her at the back. All right, we'll talk a little bit before we sign off about how to navigate desire discrepancies, because I thought that was really important.
Yeah, I think that for some people, so I kind of think of desire discrepancies in 2 different ways. So one way is I want to have more sex and my partner wants to have less sex. And then another way is like, I want to have kinky sex, but my partner doesn't want to have kinky sex.
Yeah.
And I think that people get really caught up in this sort of like tit for tat model where they're like, okay, well, if you do this, then I'll do this. Or like, if you want to have more sex, like we can do it on like Tuesdays and Saturdays, but I don't actually.
If you empty the dishwasher.
Right. Yeah. Or like if you don't, whatever. So it gets very like transactional in a way that feels disingenuous to the point of my sexuality education model, which is to have things be consensual and pleasurable.
Yeah, it's certainly not sexy when it's like a transaction.
No.
Yeah.
And it's not what you want to do.
Or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
So the chapter on navigating desire discrepancy mostly looks at how do you learn how to talk about navigating around your desire discrepancy. What does it actually mean to you as a person, as an individual, and as a couple? And how to make a compromise around desire discrepancies that actually feels genuine and like you are making a decision rather than giving something up and losing.
Yeah. So really a conversation facilitated by a pro who kind of helps you just get to a better place. Like if you really want to role play and you want to whatever, be a nurse and he is kind of embarrassed, or she or whoever your partner is finds it kind of mortifying. How do you, I don't know. I mean, I guess that's kind of what I meant when I was talking about bad chemistry a little, like how do you overcome these hurdles sometimes? But it sounds like what you're saying, and which makes sense, is good communication, and sometimes you need help from a facilitator.
Well, I think some people get really stuck on the surface level of what a desire discrepancy is. So like, I want less sex, you want more sex. There's so much that goes into that, right? So it's like, is that discrepancy, like, why are people's sex drives doing what they're doing? Is it about a conflict that happened between the two of you years ago that you never resolved? Is it about something that's going on contextually, just like the stress of the world or like your job or whatever? Is it repressed like sex education stuff from childhood where you never learned how to like talk about sex that much? Like there's just so many things that go into it. That
so many things. Yeah. Like
think about
trauma. I have a friend who doesn't want to have sex that much, and she's discovering in her 50s that there's repressed trauma. I mean, that's
right. And so for my clients, a lot of the time I'm asking them like, okay, like, do you want to obliterate the desire difference, or do you want to learn how to live with the desire difference? Like, what's the goal, you know? And then we use this really helpful therapy tool that is not my invention. It's very common, but it's called Externalizing the Problem. And there's a bunch of information in the book about that and a little like question chart about externalizing the problem. But it kind of looks at like, the desire discrepancy doesn't have to be it's your fault because you don't want to have enough sex, or it's your fault because you want to have too much sex. It's actually the desire discrepancy is a third entity in your relationship, and it's affecting you both and your relationship. So if we can remove the discrepancy as a third entity and talk about how are the two of you going to team up against working with this third entity, suddenly you're free to make all these different decisions, because it's not about me and it's not about you. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's just, it's a thing and we need to figure it out.
Interesting. Yeah. And the teaming up makes a lot of sense, right? You're kind of, you're on the same side and not combating each other. Fascinating. All right, everyone. Well, I highly recommend this book, Hot and Unbothered: How to Think About, Talk About, and Have the Sex You Really Want, by Yana Tallon-Hicks. It's great. It just came out from Harper Wave. Again, I'm super impressed. And did we not cover anything that you really want to cover?
I am hosting a book club for the book. It's going to start, I don't know when this will come out in your podcast, but the book club's going to start September 19th.
This podcast is going to come out on Friday. We're doing this one right away. Yeah. So it starts September 19th.
And it's going to run for 6 weeks. And we're going to meet on Zoom, and we're going to tackle 2 to 3 chapters a meeting. And it's for people who want to talk to me more in depth about the stuff in the book, or have more group conversations about the concepts in the book. And
that is so cool. Hold on, I'm putting in the chat, starting September 19th. So how do people sign up?
There is a link on my Instagram. I'm routing it through my big cartel.
Through your big cartel? What does that mean?
Yeah, I will write it. It's just so long. It's like an online store basically, but it's just so consensual.
That's great. So people just need to order the book and start reading it, and then you can join the book club starting September 19th for 6 weeks.
Yes.
Bit consensual. Bigcartel.com. Okay, cool. I thought you were talking about like a French hat or something. I didn't know. Well, that's a really good idea. And that's a great idea for book sales. And have you enjoyed the book tour? I guess everything is virtual these days, mostly, right?
I've gotten to do some in-person stuff, which has been really fun. I'm doing a lot of local in-person things, and I just like my local community has like been my number one fan forever because the sex column is very local and homegrown. So that's been really fun.
You should try and do something at Canyon Ranch. I don't know if you ever go there, but I used to be.
I don't know.
I haven't been. It's in Massachusetts, in Lenox. It's a spot. I haven't been since pre-COVID, but they, you should tell your publisher to make sure the book is sold there, and you should do something there. I think that'd be a good audience for you.
Nice.
All right. Well, loved meeting you, Yana. Have a great day. And this will go out on Friday. And we no questions. You guys were all quiet during this, but
this happens to me a lot. People get nervous and then they like DM me later.
Yeah. All right. Really great to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.